Hi, everyone. I am Tavri Crouch. I am the independent film coordinator at the Chicago Film Office. So happy to be here with Mezgla Media Collective. This is their second day of their screenwriting intensive, also called Chicago Screenwriters Getaway. We are so honored and excited to have Ashley Cooper with us today as our keynote speaker. This is going to be a fireside chat conversation with Ashley to talk about her life and career as a Chicagoan, as a TV writer from Chicago who's currently living in LA, currently writing for the NBC show Chicago Fire. A little bit more about Ashley. Ashley is a story editor, again, for Chicago Fire. She's a Chicago native. She's a proud Southsider who attended Columbia College, Chicago for film, where she received a BA in film. Her career started in the mailroom at CBS in Studio City, California. From there, she worked in the production accounting department as a clerk and second assistant accountant on multiple television shows and films. Then later, Ashley transitioned into the locations department as a coordinator for Chicago Fire for 6 seasons. In 2019, Ashley was a finalist for NBC's Writers on the Verge Fellowship program. Ashley is a film enthusiast with a vibrant passion for film history and theory. She curated multiple film programs in partnership with microcinemas on the south and west side of Chicago, with the mission that film has a unique opportunity to bridge the gap of misunderstanding. So that is quite the resume, Ashley.
You make me sound so cool, though.
So we're going to dig all into that. So we'll be spending the next hour with Ashley, physically and also virtually, because we're also live on Facebook as well as YouTube. And then we'll spend the last 30 minutes for questions, Q&As. So let's get into it. So Ashley, your career in film and TV has not followed a straight path. You've worked in various departments, including production accounting, locations, and now television writing. You also have a passion for film history, classic films, all kinds of films, international films, film history and theory. So that passion, coupled with your experience in these various departments, how has those different roles helped you as a writer?
Well, it's made me patient. When, it's like you have an idea of how you think life is supposed to go, especially as a young person, especially after post film school, and who wouldn't love to graduate and become exactly who they want to be, but there was a journey that I wasn't aware of at the time that I had to go on. And I do feel like every part of that journey makes me a better artist. But writing, especially for television, is also a business. And understanding the business of how it works beyond the writer's room has been very beneficial for me in where I am now. Because a lot of writers have never not been in the writer's room. And so sometimes they're not always fully aware of what happens beyond the script. How hard it is to make a television show, especially a show like the show I work on, because we shoot 22 to 23 episodes a year, which is about 10 months of the year. And it's hard work. So I'm really grateful for all the time I spent not as a professional writer, because it just made me a better writer all around.
I hear that. I also hear that's what showrunners are looking for in reading sample writing, is a point of view, having an original voice. It's not so much the writing, you want to be a good writer, you want to have the craft down, you want to develop your craft as a writer, but it's also how you see the world and think about these things. So how has your upbringing in Chicago contributed to that as well? Your perspective.
Well, it was particularly well on a show that's about civil workers in Chicago. But, I think everybody's background has something to add to their writing and whatnot. Just being a Black woman, being, a very proud Southsider, being from a city like Chicago that's very segregated, very cultured, but then at the same time can be incredibly violent. I think being around the many different cultures that I was around as a child and a young person, you can't help but have that influence you in your writing and just who you are. Because then as you grow older, your writing changes. Whatever art that you're in, it's going to change. It's going to mature with you as you go on. And so every life experience adds to that. Being from Chicago and then writing on a show that takes place here and is shot fully in Chicago, which is also like very rare. Like shows like ER, exteriors were Chicago, but interiors were always like Los Angeles. It makes it a very unique experience for me. So I'm like very grateful to be a Chicagoan, because a lot of times the other writers will just ask me random questions. What's like a popular steakhouse? What's a street that's always like traffic? What's a street that's very confusing that people, no matter how long they've been there, still don't really understand it, like Lower Wacker, like things like that.
Yes. So. Yes. It bothers me that a lot of LA writers aren't from Chicago when they're staffed on a show about Chicago, because they're not always going to get it right, So in many ways, you are the secret weapon in the room, in that you have firsthand knowledge of the locations, of the culture. So that can only help. That can only help writing on a Chicago show. So.
Absolutely.
Did you always know that you wanted to write for television, or when was the seed planted?
I always knew I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be a filmmaker, and I had a producer on the show who gave me the advice that I should probably focus more on writing because I could get a job with it. and then work my way into the other things that I would like to do. So that's kind of what I did. This is the golden age of television. And we just have so many great shows that have come out in the past 20 years. And it changed my perspective of what type of writing I wanted to do, because I always wanted to write for film and, direct my own stuff. And I still want to do that. But television is so good right now that I couldn't help but get caught up in a story that goes beyond a couple of hours, but goes into years long, and a character that you can follow and watch their journey for years is very appealing for me as a writer. But like the difference between writing on a television show versus being a screenwriter and making your own films is that you're writing in a group, and you have bosses, and you have networks, and you have a lot of notes, and there's a lot of revisions, and it really is a group effort. But I enjoy that because I enjoy community. So that's really for me. But if you're someone who wouldn't like a lot of notes and doesn't want to work for someone and doesn't want to have someone over you, probably being a screenwriter would be more beneficial.
That is the big difference, right? The collaborative aspect of TV writing versus the singular lone writer. Let's get more into that as well. Those questions go down my list, so I'm going to skip a bunch of questions to connect to that point. So let's talk about the writer's room. What is a story editor? So you are a story editor on Chicago Fire. Can you help us break down what a story editor does?
Sure. It's really just the title. It's not what it sounds like. In the WGA and the Writers Guild, there's basically different tiers of a writer. And entry level is a staff writer, which is what I was last season. And as you work your way up, usually every season or new show that you're on, in theory, you're going to move up in rank. So the next one up is story editor. But it's funny because it's kind of like this nice little step that, like, big step that you take. You get paid for your scripts now.
Yes.
It's really cool. And you're also guaranteed a script. But on a show like Fire, because we have so many episodes, staff writers actually do get their own episode to write, which is a really cool feature about this show. So it's story editor, or it's staff writer, then story editor, executive story editor. Sometimes people skip that step. And then it's co-producer, and there's also a series of producers past that point. But that's just that's what that means. It's just more, it's just different within the guild. But you start off as a staff writer. But my first year as a staff writer was all on Zoom because it was a COVID year. So I didn't have to move to LA right away. But that's pretty much the difference. But it's just a writer. No matter what your title is, you're a writer on the show.
You talked a little bit about pay. Does the pay increase from staff writer to story editor? Okay.
Yeah, it does.
So it's a title, but also a pay increase as well.
Yeah. It is.
Yeah. So you mentioned the collaborative aspect and receiving notes, the aspect of revision upon revision. As we all know, writing is it's in the rewriting that the script gets created and shaped, right? So how is it for you in the rewriting process? How do you receive notes? Do you have any tips on how? Because it can be you either know how to take notes or you don't know how to receive notes. So how do you go about receiving notes?
Well, my job previous to this, in every way, you're going to receive notes in this business, right? In some form or fashion. If you have someone over you, they're going to tell you what to do. So it's never like you don't receive notes. Receiving notes as a writer is a different thing, or as anyone like a writer, a director, or actor, because there's a vulnerability there. If I work in locations, I'm not necessarily vulnerable per se about that. If I did something wrong, okay, I'm going to fix it. But, here you're opening yourself up, no matter what show it is. Hopefully, you're putting some part of yourself in it. And it can be a little jarring when you're first getting notes. The thing about our show and how our rooms work, sometimes we do hear the other notes that other writers get. So you kind of gauge what your showrunner wants, because you're supposed to write in your showrunner's voice. This is their show. But you just have to be open and just know this is what they pay you for, first of all. So anytime you're doing a rewrite, and that's anything, any job you have, when you have that attitude of like, I don't feel like doing this, unless you're a volunteer, you have to remind yourself it's literally what they pay you for. So, and then also I'm working for incredibly senior writers. Like, they're well seasoned. They're very smart. They can come up with a story so quick. I'm very much so in awe of them. So I'm open to it because I'm not coming in with an attitude that I know more than someone else. I'm just starting my career in this, and these are people who have been in it for decades. And so the notes that they give me are generally really good notes, and it makes your script better. It opens you up when you write, future episodes or whatever you're writing to be a better writer. And I think being able to receive notes makes you a better artist anyway, because there's sometimes you're just way too involved in that script, in that story, and they're able to see a bigger picture of it. And so I enjoy that part of it. It's excruciating because it can be, it can be kind of brutal, but at the same time, it makes me a better writer and a better person in this business, because it is a business and you're going to always receive notes. It's not your money. Number one, if you're making it, network is paying for it. They're going to have a say in it. And if you're not, like I said, if you're not okay with that, then, possibly, writing film scripts, being a screenwriter would be maybe a better choice for you. But it's a very interesting process, and you can't really explain it until you're in it.
It's not personal, right? It's a job.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on that note of receiving notes, and being in a writer's room, so how does the collaborative process look like? Can you sort of walk us through the day of working in a writer's room? How does the collaboration look and feel like?
Well, every show is different, so I'll point that out. On our show, for most shows, it's, you're coming up with the season arc together. This is what we're doing this season. This is what we're doing. We have 12 main characters, so we start off with a blank board where we have our episodes going across and the characters coming down, and we just go through it bit by bit, and we're pitching ideas. I work on a procedural, which is like a CSI or a Law and Order, where every episode is different, and it's about firefighters. So we're dealing with everything from an elevator breaking down to big fires, small fires, to car accidents, to impalements, so many different things. And, you're also talking about paramedics. So there's so many stories that we're pulling from, and that we're pitching to our executive producers as potential episode ideas. And we do that together. And then you're assigned an episode, and you have like a basic idea of what the episode's going to be about, but you're adding, you have the bones, but you're adding the meat, you're adding the flavor to it. On other shows, it's different. They work more together on the episode, even when someone's writing it. A lot of that meat, a lot of that flavor is done as a collaborative. Our show's just a little different. And I enjoy that. They give you a lot of freedom, a lot of independence when you are writing your episode. But we're like, me and the other writers are on a text chain, and do we do this? Have we done this type of fire before? Or has this ever happened to this character? And we kind of just bounce ideas off of each other. And even before we're pitching our episode to our bosses, we're pitching it to each other first, and kind of like going through it and, working it out together, which is a very cool process. It's very different than what I was used to working alone.
How big is that group? How large is the writer's room? And it sounds like there's an immense level of trust to be able to work on that level and kind of play with each other's ideas and throw out ideas. How large is the room?
Ours is under 10 people, but some of them are much larger. But yeah, I think there's a camaraderie, hopefully, that people will have with each other. We're on our 10th season, and most people have worked more than one season on the show. So understanding this show and, the heart of what the show is very important. But there is a trust, and it's hard work. So it's kind of like any department on any show or film, I feel like there's some level a lot of times of just like there's some level of like get to war together, because it's hard work. It's not easy. It's fun, but it's also like long hours and a lot of work that has to be done. And on a show, everything changes every episode. So it's always a challenge. So you do have that camaraderie with your teammates. And it's the same in the other services.
Yeah, you're in the trenches together, whether you're yes. So it's gonna build, it's gonna feel like a family. It's gonna build a team spirit for sure. So one more question, it may not be the last question about the writer's room. Part of this conversation and part of this weekend of intensive is to throw pull back the curtain on how that looks like. So can you help pull back the curtain on how that looks like and as it relates to really how you're experiencing it, because COVID has affected how it's traditionally run, right?
Yeah.
So can you walk us through how like a typical day looks for you, what the structure is, what the schedule is, and are you writing, constantly? How does that look like for you?
Well, you have to remember that since I was a staff writer last season, I'm a story editor. I only know things are like post-COVID, like since COVID's been in existence. I didn't work in a writer's room as an assistant or a support staff. And so I'm unfamiliar with what it was like before this pandemic. But usually we were getting on morning Zooms and afternoon Zooms and working through the episodes together and figuring out in the very beginning what this season is going to be. And the way an episode works in general, and this is any show, you have your board, you get assigned whatever episodes you're writing, and it's a whiteboard. I have one like you kind of can't see. But I have one I'm working on back there that's like on the easel.
There's a bit of a glare, but there's definitely a light for sure.
There's so much light over there. So you start with your board and you do your episode that way. So it's divided by ours is 5 acts. That's how many acts we have in an episode. And then we have a teaser and then 5 acts. And every color is a different storyline. So visually, you're able to see how it all goes. So you can see like, oh, this storyline, that's the A story. We can immediately see how many beats it is in an episode and so forth and so forth. And you pitch it to your bosses. And the way I'm pitching it is, I can get very animated, and then bam, the truck hits the blah blah blah, and then they scream, like the whole thing.
Do you like pitching?
It's excruciating. I think it is really hard. Like it's a learned skill to me. It really is. To be able to pitch it, and you're pitching it scene by scene. Like every scene that will be an episode, you're pitching it. And when that gets approved, and sometimes something can happen where your bosses aren't digging the story anymore, even though they know generally what it's about, and maybe you have to redo your board. And it's a presentation is really what it is. You have to be prepared and know what your stories are about, and you may get asked a ton of questions. And then once that process is approved, you move on to your outline, which is pretty much a short story form of your script. And which is, I love that part of it. And every show has a different method on how they outline, like the rhythm of it. Some shows our show here is very much heavily about grammar and, all the vices. You're not just winging it. This is really like a short story version of your script. And you send it to your bosses. They'll have notes. They'll go over them with you. And the notes can be hours long. Like, notes can be, or they can be short, but they can be really long. And then you revise it. And then the network may have notes on your revision. And then you revise it. And then you go on to script. And the process starts all over again. You write the script, and you get notes. Then the network has notes. Now production has finally got it. But then something may go up in production where they need different pages, different themes. You may have to add something in. So it's a process. And on a show like ours, it moves pretty fast. Like once the ball starts rolling, it's, we're not everybody's going to be able to meet because somebody script is shooting and they may be in Chicago, working on it. And so, producing it. And so it's a well-oiled machine, but it's a train that's constantly moving when you're on network television, because if it was Netflix, well, we wouldn't have to air in September. It's like, it's Netflix. You can air whenever you want. But network TV, we're airing this time. This is a train that's moving.
Yeah.
And so you're writing fast.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
So it sounds to me like you said it's a process. And this is where you have to be comfortable with notes, because it sounds like the note giving and the note taking is constant.
Yeah.
All through the process. So I lost my train of thought. So so when it comes to your writing, it sounds like there's a lot of planning or pre-planning before the writing actually happens. Like,
there's nothing but planning.
Yeah. Okay.
It has to be like approved.
Yeah.
You know, because by the time the script gets to production, it's not much longer since you wrote it. So they don't have a lot of time to be like, I don't like this episode. You know what I mean? And now you have to redo everything. That's why so much has to be approved beforehand. You know, and everything's a little bit different. How I'm pitching something in my board, well, it written when it finally gets to the script, there's so much that's added to it, you know, and you kind of want to always surprise your bosses a little bit by adding a little extra every time. So you pitch the board, but save a little for the outline. You write the outline, save a little for the script. You know, it's a lot of that.
Huh. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're not giving away everything up front.
I'm not.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's go back to your journey. So how did you come? Because you were working in locations as a location coordinator for Chicago Fire. How did the transition happen?
I was really lucky to be on Chicago Fire because we had a line producer who was very cool and very receptive to me giving him scripts. So I was like, feel like I courted him in a professional way, obviously, for like 6 years. It was a long time. It feels like it happened overnight for some people because I didn't always share my aspirations with people. I consider it something personal. And it means a lot to me. And some people don't understand it. And, you know, like you tell someone you're a location coordinator that you want to be a writer. It's like, well, everybody wants to be a writer. You know, that's usually the attitude people had. But we had like an awesome line producer who loved film and was a nice person. That's not always the case. And I told him I was a writer. I wanted to know if I could send him a script I wrote and get some feedback on it. I knew the script was good, but you always tell people you want some feedback because then people are willing to read it, you know. And he did. And then I was continuously giving him work. And then when we were going into our 7th season, which was 3 years ago, I asked if I could shadow the writers in LA because there was someone who got to shadow a director on our sister show. And it gave me the idea, honestly. I was like, wow, she got to shadow the director for a whole episode. I wonder, can I shadow the writers? And we were ending season 6, going into season 7. And he was like, well, I'll ask, because he can't allow it. He's not a writer. He's, you know, a producer, but he has no power there. And they said no. They were like, no. And then they came back and said, well, if, you know, you're willing to, you know, I mean, if you want to fly all the way to California just to shadow us for a day or two, then all right. And that's what I did. I was on hiatus, but they weren't. They were back for season 7, starting the writing process. But the rest of us, the crew, we were all on vacation. And I did. I flew myself out there for a week. And I got to shadow them and I got to meet them and I got to see their process. And that was really important because I didn't know it. I hadn't had access to a writer's room. And unless you've been in the writer's room, you usually don't have access to one. And seeing that, I was like supercharged when I came back to Chicago and I was, you know, ready to like write a spec of Fire, which is another word to say script. It's a mock episode. And then I didn't actually write it until the end of the season because, you know, once you're working, then it's a lot that happens. And the producer was like, you know, if you never write a spec, they're never going to read your work. And I was like, okay, let me get this spec together. I write it. I study the show like a science. I did. I had to watch the show. I read the 20 episodes that we had already shot for that season. And I did. I studied it. I studied the voice, because that's what you do when you're writing on a TV show. You're writing in the voice of your showrunner. So let me figure out what that voice is. And I was lucky to have access to all these scripts, but I also I immersed myself in what this show was. And I wrote the episode. I was really proud of it. I thought it wasn't easy because it's 12 main characters and you have about 50 pages to tell about 3 to 5 stories, because there's so many different stories in the episode. And then the showrunner came to Chicago for our rap party, and I told him, like, hey, I wrote a spec. And he said, I'll read it if Todd reads it, the producer. And I go to the producer, and I'm like, great, he said he'll read it if you read it. And then he didn't read it. Like, he didn't read it because he was working. He was busy. I think he forgot. But like every few months, and I mean months, I was like, yeah, I remember that script. But before that, we're going into season 8. I go to Europe for a hiatus, and I submit to an NBC fellowship. And it's free. You needed a spec of an existing show that was approved, which one of the shows was Chicago Fire. Chicago Fire is on NBC. I already wrote the spec. Cool. I did the essays. I didn't think anything of it. And when we came back for season 8, I got a letter or an email that said I was in the top 6% of the applicants. And I didn't expect that at all. I was like, oh, I've like made it to this next round, and thousands of people apply off of this Chicago Fire script. And I didn't get it, which was fine. It wasn't fine at the time. I was devastated. But it was, it was fine that I didn't get it, because that was also the year COVID came and like rocked our whole world. The show ended early, and we ended in March instead of in April, what we usually do. And then my dad passed away from COVID. And so I was insane, as someone would be if they lost a parent abruptly from a pandemic in a pandemic. And I thought for a second I was never going to write again. And then when I started feeling like a human again, ironically, around all the protests that happened, I reached out to that producer, and I had polished my scripts, and I sent him a pilot and the spec, and was like, hey, will you please read this? And then he said yes. And then he called me a week later. I don't know if you've ever read it, though. He said yes. And then this has been a year and 3 months since I wrote it at this point. It was a while. Now we're going into season 9. This is season 7. And he said the writers had a meeting about you, and they want you to send them some samples of your work. And that was a Friday. And I was like, okay, great. He's like, I can't promise anything. I don't even know what this is for. I was like, well, just the fact that they will read my work is like exciting for me. And I send it, and they're like, hey, gonna read it. And then I get an email Monday saying, hey, can we hop on a Zoom? Mind you, I didn't sleep that whole weekend, but they're like, can we hop on a Zoom to talk about your aspirations as a writer? And I didn't know what, I didn't know anything. And then when we got on Zoom, they told me how much they loved my spec, and then they offered me a job. And so it felt like it was quick, because it was a Friday, and then by Tuesday I was hired, but it was a 6-year process.
I think we're all processing that.
It was crazy. It was like that. And then, and then I came on, and then because my bosses couldn't fly into Chicago, as they usually do when production starts, and I'm the only writer in Chicago, they sent me to set for about 5 months, which I was an office girl. Set was a new thing for me. And on their behalf, which was really cool and rare. I don't know if staff writers get that opportunity, but it was really cool. And I got an episode, and I got to go to set for that whole episode. And no writer last year got to be on set at all, but we had a live stream. So while we would shoot their episodes, they're texting me their notes to get to the director. And yeah, so it was a very cool year.
Ashley, wow. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And that speaks to your level of dedication, persistence, and you had life tragedies happen, losing your father, and I'm glad that
Yeah,
we should have drinks at some point when we meet up in person, but to talk about life, but it's all connected. Life and writing. Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Which all ties into building your network. Like, you built a network. Like, you took advantage and tapped into your network. And what advice, what tips can you give us in building a network to help support the path to writing, to being a TV writer?
I think there's a saying my friend used to say: if you stay on ready, you'll always be ready. So if I had polished my scripts when I polished them, I didn't panic when someone told me to send samples in. When I got to the next round of this fellowship and they asked for the pilot, my pilot wasn't fully polished, right? So I had to panic. I had like 48 hours, if that, maybe 36, to turn it around, which I know is why I didn't get the fellowship. But after that moment, the lesson for me was to always kind of be ready, have something, like always have like just something together. And that helped me having that something together, because I was lazy to have panic in that moment. Oh my God, let me figure out what I'm going to send. I already knew what I was going to send. I had already just polished it off. And, but yeah, I would say, like, the answer is always no if you don't ask. Like, I was kind of nervous about asking to shadow the writers, but if I had never asked that, they would have never known who I was. So when they were looking for a staff writer and wanting to give someone an opportunity, like, how would they have known about me at all? You know what I mean? If I didn't take the opportunity, even if they said no, they would have still known there was like somebody on the show who had aspirations to be a writer. Or even to ask that producer, hey, will you take a look at my work? A lot of people can get nervous. I feel like the culture in LA, everybody's going to ask somebody for a favor. Like, eventually, networking is such a huge thing. And, and then eventually you may call on that person in your network. And so, yeah. So when I was starting to feel like I don't want to bother this guy, there was a director who's like really cool, who did a few episodes on the show. And I remember telling him what was going on. And he was like, stay on him. Like, stay on him. Don't get nervous. Like, he was like, don't get nervous. Don't bother him for annoying, but be persistent. Like, hey, have you read this? It's okay. He's like, it's totally fine to do that. And I did. I took that advice because I was about to give up. I was like, he's never going to read it. It is what it is. I'll try another. I'll apply for this fellowship again, or whatever I told myself.
Yes. So yes, we hear that. Persistence. So for some of us that don't work on a show, don't work on a Chicago show, that aren't, don't have a producer there on set that they can reach out to. Like, so what advice would you give us? Because you mentioned community. It's also about building community as well. And Mezgla is big on that. So what can we do as for some of us that don't let's say, work on a production but want to tap in?
Well, every network has a fellowship program, usually for directing and or writing. They're a great, so many people, especially minorities, because sometimes we don't have opportunities from knowing people, because it is a business where, it is about who you know. There are really great opportunities for you to get your work in front of someone. And so many writers have become very successful from those programs. ABC Disney is really great. The NBC one is wonderful. The Warner Brothers, because Warner Brothers Television produces so many shows that are on so many various networks. CBS has a great one. Those are really great opportunities. If you don't know anybody, they read your work blind. Like when I submit it, you can't even put your name on it. And so you're kind of like a number and an email. I think that's great. Like, I think it's wonderful, because it kind of relieves everybody from nepotism playing a huge part of it. It also gets you into, like, I love deadlines because I have to follow them, and if it's on, I can procrastinate. So if it's on my own time, this may be a problem. I love when I decided to even apply for a fellowship is that you have to complete this script. And as a writer, there's so many things that can get in your way emotionally, from finishing a work where you type in end of episode. You know what I mean? Like, that's such a great feeling if it doesn't go anywhere. If you never get into the fellowship, it's great to have a practice of, this is the deadline. I'm going to finish this project and submit it. So even if nothing comes from it, you have a sample.
Yes. So on that note as well, do you recommend that we write strictly specs or a combination of specs and pilots? Like, how do we go about, or if there's a particular show that we want to write, like we write the spec, what is your approach and what do you recommend we go about doing that?
Pilots are a thing now. Writing like original specs are a thing. People, that's what people are wanting. If you're looking for representation, that's what they're wanting. And I think I've heard certain showrunners still want a spec of an existing show or a show that existed, even though I know people want pilots. I thought it was great practice for me. I mean, I got hired off my spec, but that was, they're looking for a writer for this show. They liked that I knew this show already. And, but I thought I don't know how I would have been able to get hired on this show without understanding the show first. And so I think it's great practice, even if nothing happens from it. I think it's great practice to pick a show that you like, or even a show you don't like, but like a show that you really like, that you can see yourself writing on, and seeing if you can do it. Like, I think the first spec I wrote was a show I worked on. It was an MTV scripted show called Underemployed. Showrunner was really cool, and he read my spec, and I might have been like 24, 25. It was the first time I was like, oh, I can do this. I can write in someone else's voice. Because most writers, especially when you're young, you're not thinking about anyone's voice but your own. How do you contribute to something that is someone else's idea? And so for me, it was great to even know I could do that.
Yeah, that's really a part of the developing the craft and getting better at the writing. And in the process, you'll have some writing samples as well.
Right.
By writing specs, right? So, people like to throw around this term content is king. Well, content starts with the writing, right? Like, the more you have of that, the more that you can use that in some aspect, whether or not you're going to make it into film, it turns into an actual watchable thing on screen. It's something that you can certainly utilize in some respects, at least to get the job, right? To get into the writer's room. So, Let me check the time. Oh, let's actually, no, we got some more time before we jump into Q&A. Ashley, this is so great. I mean, this is so wonderful. Thank you for
inviting me.
Yeah, just telling your story and laying it all out with writing and your journey. It's you know, a lot of people dream about being a showrunner. Now, TV is made of writers, right? Like that's where writers thrive, is in TV land. And eventually you get to showrunner status, that's something, but not everybody's made to be a showrunner. So what are your thoughts about that, where everybody wants to be a showrunner, it sounds like?
Yeah, and then I feel like I watched some interview with Lena Waithe, and she talked about how she realized she didn't want to be a showrunner, because she's not a showrunner for the shows that she produces. She's the creator of it, so she's still heavily involved, but she didn't want the showrunner responsibilities, because it's more than writing. So many meetings, there's so many things you have to approve of, especially if you're talking about like a first season show. Now you're getting, the layouts of, whatever stage you're building, and there's so many things you got to think about beyond just the story. So I think it's really smart for someone, especially once you're in it, to figure out if that's something you want or you don't want. I would be interested in it because I love production. I love that side of it too. But some people just want to focus on the writing. And I think that's totally fine. And that's good to always be honest about what you want and what you don't want. And the cool thing about the WGA, the guild, in your first year, they put you in a mentoring group if you want to be. And it's usually with like a senior level writer who's usually like a showrunner or an executive producer. And they need to meet with a showrunner, and it's just great talking to him, hearing like all the things that he has to do, all the issues he can face, because it is a very nice way to get a clear picture of like what you want to deal with this one day, But yeah, I think those are conversations that writers have a lot now, because I do run into writers like, yeah, I don't have any aspirations to be a showrunner. I'd like to my pilot to get picked up. I would like for it to be made into a show, but I'd be okay with the network hiring a showrunner that isn't me.
Yeah. So it's getting really honest about first learning what a showrunner actually does, right?
Right.
Like you said, more than writing, if any, and not every showrunner can write and vice versa. And it is production heavy because you're hiring a bunch, it involves a lot of overseeing of other departments and things like that. Like you said,
overseeing your writer's room, understanding how to manage other writers, and not just being, because it's beyond just being a writer. It's what it sounds like. It's a showrunner.
Exactly. Running a show, and there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to making a show and running a show. Now here's another question that we get asked a lot, or is like in the atmosphere a lot, is it possible to have a TV writing career and not live in LA? In other words, for us Chicagoans, can we stay in Chicago and still have a writing career? And you can speak directly to this because you're from Chicago.
Right. I mean, maybe because of things being more virtual, that could be possible. I get asked that question a lot too. And I would say right now, no. That's just the honest truth. It would be awesome if it was, but what it is, you're usually writing at, like us, you're writing at the studio. The studios networks are in LA. And then you have writers' rooms that are in New York, and a lot of late night writing rooms, for late night TV shows, they're in New York. But that was the one thing where it was, I was shocked when I was asked to move to LA, but I wasn't that shocked. Everybody was like, but that's like the one thing you have to move there for. And it's true. It's like, it's true. It kind of is what it is. That's usually what I say. Like, it is what it is. That's like you can do so many other things in this industry and don't have to be in LA. And you mean people who lived in LA but got hired on Chicago Fire been in Chicago for 10 years. So, that's always a possibility. But right now, this is where it is. And I think this is where a lot of writers want to be. They like having the good weather.
So you are not complaining about having to move out.
I'm not complaining. Even though I love Chicago. I absolutely love Chicago. It's the best city to me. But yeah, I do get asked that a lot, and I wish I had a better answer. And I think maybe if things were virtual, you could, but you're asking like now a whole industry of writers. There's a lot of TV writers to relocate somewhere. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah. It is what it is.
It is what it is. Yeah.
It's just the way of the industry. And that being said, because the gripe is why doesn't Chicago have writers' rooms? So can you answer that question? Why doesn't Chicago have writers' rooms?
Well, you'd have to have a network want to bring their writers to Chicago. That would be it. If you're talking about experienced television writers, they live in LA. Because it's not just about being a good writer. I'm a good writer. But even when you're working, you learn how much you don't know, even though I've been in this business my entire adult life. It's so much I didn't know until I was on this side, and then you're seeing like, oh, wow, I had no ideas how much, like, for example, you think you write the script, you turn it in, we're in production. All right, this part of the job for me is over. And, you go back to the room, but it's not. We forgot about everything that happens on set. And what's the purpose of a writer's presence on set if you already have a director, if you already have actors who've been with these characters for seasons, years. And that's because there are things that you know as a writer that everybody else may not know. Like, I know what's going to happen in the next 6 episodes. You guys don't know. So that moment where you have her pick up the paper in an angry way, we know she's not angry because she's going to say something about not being angry 2 episodes from now. So pointing you to be like, hey, can we get a take of it where she's not so aggressive? Because I know that that's not going to play well in the arc of the season. And or just how much little things can get missed in the script where you're like, oh, they might have lost the heart of the scene right here from this one thing. And how much of a writer's presence is sometimes needed. We're, like I said, we're a well-oiled machine, but sometimes needed on shows and all of the things that can come up creatively that people disagree with, where this line is really hard to say, Can I say it this way? Now you got to ask your showrunner. There's so many things that I didn't even think about that were necessary. So as far as can we just have a writer's room in Chicago? Right now, we don't have seasoned enough television writers who've ran a whole show, not a web series, a show where you have millions and tens of millions of dollars behind it to do that. That's my opinion on it. And to get there, and why they probably don't is because there are millions of this, too much money to fumble with someone who may be be the greatest writer, but doesn't know everything yet. I don't know if I answered anything.
That makes complete sense. All of that. The lack of infrastructure.
Yeah.
Of the system is just hasn't started, and the lack of writers. you know.
And it may not be like this lack of writers. There's so many writers here that are from Chicago or New York or Alabama, or they're from all over. Very rarely am I in LA and I meet someone who's from LA. Everybody's like a transplant. But I think when people say writers' rooms, I wonder if they confuse writer groups. Because there are writing groups of people. It's very popular here, where you may get together once a month and go over your work and you give each other feedback. But this is like a business, and it's like, well, why can't we have a locations department for Chicago Fire in LA? It's like, it's just not like that. They got to be where the action is. And since the money comes from the network, how I look at it is that that's why the action is here.
That makes sense. Money talks.
Yeah.
And if the business structure is the infrastructure being the business structure, right? All the moving parts that help grease the wheel for the train to keep going. If that's not here, like you said, why would they bring it here?
Yeah. And like one more point to that is, if all the writers from this show lived in Chicago, if they assume that this show was in 23 episodes, but let's say it was 10. Well, most writers don't work on one show per year. They may work on several shows per year. Now they'd have to move to all these different cities. You know what I mean? Now you'd have to say all of television writing has to be somewhere else. That's why it's all in one place, because they can't live everywhere. They're hopping on different shows and things like that. You're bringing people who work on this Netflix show and now this person who worked on that CBS show. And if one was in New Orleans and the other one was in Chattanooga, and now they got to all move to Chicago, that'd be a lot of moving for a writer. That's why you got to pick a place. And the place that Hollywood picked was Hollywood.
So literally, the writers' rooms are physically in
physical rooms. Yeah. We're just virtual right now a little bit, but that's gonna change.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that comprehensive breakdown of why we don't have writers' rooms in Chicago or anywhere else outside of LA. That makes complete sense. One more question before we jump into Q&As. And I know we have some burning questions over here. So what are you working on? What other writings, like beyond TV? What are you working on? Because you mentioned, you're a filmmaker.
Yeah.
You have a passion for film. So what do you have up your sleeve in terms of your personal projects, whether writing, filmmaking? Can you give us some insight into that?
Well, right now I was film programming in Chicago and working with micro cinemas. I'm thinking of doing about something like that here, because you can do things outside here year round. So I'm working on that, working on showing films that feature Black characters, classic films that people sometimes forget about or sometimes like really have never seen. And I love doing that because there's always a story to it. I love film history, and I love like showing a film and then talking about it beforehand to give people a little bit of context of what was going on in the world when they were making it. Why this piece of film is important, in my opinion, because a part of film preservation isn't just physically preserving film that was made on, a piece of plastic that can decay over time. It is also watching films and talking about them. That's how you keep it alive. And I find it another form of storytelling because I do a lot of research in it. And then I try to find what would keep people engaged. And then we watch the film and then we talk about it after. So it's something I'm very passionate about, just trying to figure that out here while I'm working. And then I'm always working on something, because there can be some downtime when you're not writing. And, I try to take advantage of that as much as I can. But yeah.
We have producers here that are always looking for writers to partner with to produce scripts. So FYI, if you're ever looking for producers, because we got some producers in this room as well. So Ashley, I'm going to turn it over to Q&As. I want to see if there's any questions. Okay.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Questions over here?
To ask. Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
So much for all this information, definitely processing everything. It's just great to hear someone up in Chicago from LA. And my question is, back to the samples that you kind of had on hand. What do you recommend to someone who's maybe trying to build up those samples, or just really fine tuning those writing skills? As you were saying, things aren't when you were doing things, maybe some scripts weren't as polished, or they weren't in that stage yet. What does that polishing kind of process look like to you? First of all, gathering those samples and then getting them in a really good place to submit to places.
Well, my sample was a mock episode, a spec of fire, and then it was a pilot. My idea of polishing is I need space for whatever I write usually. Sometimes when I'm too into it, there are things I don't like that I'm just so conflicted. I go back and forth, and my method of writing can be very much so theatrical. So I'm acting scenes out. I always get ideas in the shower. I keep my phone handy because I'll do a ton of voice notes where I may be acting out a whole scene and playing both roles or whoever the characters are. And so my idea of polishing is giving myself some space, coming back at it, seeing what worked and what didn't work. Sometimes I'm like, oh, no, this was, I was just too involved. I'll share it with other writers who I feel like know how to give their notes, because I think that's a skill. I'm not always the best at giving notes to people. I'm like, I liked it. I didn't like it. It's hard. People give you such detailed notes. I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's a part of the polishing for me. And grammar and typos, things like that is a part of the polish. But yeah, and then trying to get to a place where you're like, I'm locking this right now. I'm not adding anything else to it. This script, this breathable script, I'm going to cut off the air supply for a while, because I'm not breathing anything else into it. And now I'm ready to share it. But I'm always open to repolishing anything I wrote. But sometimes I'm like, no, this is the script right now. And now if you go into production, so many things are going to come up. But this is it right now. I'm ready to share it. I'm proud of it. I feel strongly about it. I think that's such a personal decision though. I could never tell. I don't know what it's like for anyone else. I just know what it's like for me. So I think coming up with that process and whatever that measurement is for you is a thing you have to work out with yourself. This is what this is for me. This is when I know this script is ready, but that's my polishing method.
And as a follow-up, what do you kind of recommend, especially getting to know more writers in LA now too, and what do you recommend as kind of having in your toolbox for when you are asked for samples for things like a pilot, spec episodes, what is
Yeah, it's not you have. I think if you have a really one really strong script that you're proud of, I think that's a sample. Not everybody's gonna read 1,000 things, But if you have one pilot, that's great. Having two is better. because then they can read it and then there'll be that one person who's like, oh, you got anything else? Like, you know, so I think having like 2 is just like, that's good. You know what I mean? And then, you know, it's better to have 2 strong ones than to have like 5 mediocre ones. You know, because there are those people who think like, you know, it's all about the quantity of your portfolio, but it's all about the quality, because, you know, you got to hook people in real fast on a script because they may not want to read another 40 pages. They may not want to read another 5. So, you know, having something that's like really strong, shows your voice, something that you're passionate and care about, that's important more than anything to me.
Thank you.
These are some great questions, Imani. And what do you consider a strong script? In addition to having a clear voice and a clear point of view, like when you read it, you're like, this is a good script. This is a good script. Like, what makes that a good script?
I turn the page. I turn the page. I'm curious. I want to know what happens when it ends. You know what I mean? It's captivating. It has interesting characters and dynamics to it. There's so many different types of scripts out there. There's so many different things that make something good, and there's so much good content out there that, you know, that's kind of like a hard question to answer. But I would say something that makes you want to turn the page, you know, that makes you want to finish it. You know, a good script you finish, and a good script you think about beyond, you know, like when it's over. Just like a good movie, you know, like a good movie, you're like, man, that made me feel whatever way, and I wouldn't mind seeing it again. Or you're talking about it with friends, or you think about it right before you go to bed, like, oh, that was a really strange thing that happened in that part. You know, like that's for me when I know that I'm like really engaged with it. One of my first jobs, and I didn't get paid for it, so I don't know if I can call it a job. I was a reader for this production company in LA when I was 21. And I read this script, you know, reading like just so many scripts a day or so many scripts a week, and you're doing the coverage on it. So it's like, I forgot. I totally forgot how this went. But one of the scripts that I got, I thought it was so good. And it was about a 16-year-old girl who lived in like the backwoods, and she was taking care of her brother and sister, and then the family took meth, and like it was a page turner. I mean, I sat and read it in one sitting, and I thought it was going to be great. Eventually, I needed a job that paid, so I left. I didn't know what happened to it, but it ended up being this movie called Winter's Bone, which did really, really well like 10 years ago, and like got nominated for like, I think it was Best Picture. This is when they made the category to like 10 instead of 5. And I just been being like, damn, this is a story, nothing of what I've ever known. I don't know, you know, white people live in the backwoods and, you know, who don't have teeth and cook meth. Like that was like not my, you know, hunt squirrels and eat them. That was not my upbringing. But I was captivated in this world of a 16-year-old badass girl who was just trying to look for her father, because it was like she's looking for her father because the state was going to split the family up. It was something like that. So she needed the guardian to be there. But the family is from like, you know, very like Ozark, like that show. I don't know if you've seen it, but very much like that show. But yeah, so when I think of a great script, I'm like, yeah, I want to read this. I want to see this more than anything.
Yes. I can go on with my questions, but Brittany, Miriam.
Okay. I have a question. How do you get people to? Because I have a long history of just like making my own things. But my issue is, how do I get people to connect with it or engage with it?
I can't hear her from that far away.
Miriam, can you tell?
Hello. I was just asking, how do you get people to connect with the things that you create?
How do I connect with the things I create?
Yeah, how do you get people to connect? How do you get that into people's hands, the projects that you create, in the scripts that you write?
Into people's hands?
Yes.
Do you mean this? So the scripts and not the finished films?
Or the finished films, yeah.
So, Ashley, do you have any thoughts or advice on this? How do you get an audience? How do you build an audience around the work that you do? Whether it's your scripts, your finished films, or projects.
I mean, I would say with like finished projects, I haven't really looked into this in a long time, but I'm more right than anything now. I would always say probably like anything that has an audience. I mean, from film festivals to showing it to your friends. People talk. Like, that's just it. There are shows that got canceled, then everybody watched it on Netflix, then they brought them back. Like, people talk. People like to be entertained, and so, like, anything where you can have an audience for your, like, whatever film you're doing, I would think that's always the goal, Everybody kind of wants a little applause at the end of what they're doing, and, that's always the goal. I mean, there are film groups. There's a film group in Chicago. I think it's called the Chicago Film Group. It's a film club. That's what it is. And I thought it sounded corny at first. My friends definitely took me to it. And I was like, oh, this sounds really corny. I don't want to go to a film club. I'm like 30. And it was so cool. And it's like working guys. None of them like work hardcore in the industry, and they make shorts, and they basically every month, like I think it's the last Thursday of the month, get together and you watch whatever process they are in making this, and you give them feedback on it. And the shorts are so freaking good. Like, these are really talented people. But then people get to talking. Like, there was a short I saw this guy. I thought it was one of the best shorts I'd ever saw. And I was telling everybody about it. I'm like, this is amazing. When he had it on his Insta, and I'm sharing it. So I don't think they went wow. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, look at Lisa Ray. She had a web series. I remember when it came out, and she built an audience, and she didn't know nobody.
And if it's good, it's like the scripts. Like, people are gonna want to watch it. They're gonna want to tell other people about it.
Right.
So it's also like trusting that the work that you do, because that's what I'm hearing from you is like, when you've written a good script, know for yourself when it's finished and you're ready to share it with the world. So there's a lot of just a sort of a belief in yourself, not just sort of, but there has to be a belief in yourself that what you're doing is good. And if it's not, then ask people, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think you have to have some intuition there. Like, there has to be something in you, and like that it's good. And I feel like I have good taste. That's just how I feel about myself. And I trust myself with that. So it's like, I don't really need this person to tell me I'm a good writer. Shit, I know I'm a good writer. That's how I look at it, but I can always be better. And I'm always open to like learning. And I couldn't go into this writer's room thinking, well, I'm a better writer than everybody here. I'm not. And there are a lot of great writers out there. That's what makes writing in a writer's room fun. You're working with great, like-minded people, but you got to know when it's good. That's my thing. And then you're going to fail sometimes. And that's okay too. It's like, because then you just grow from that and you learn from that. You're like, I did not do that right. I pitched an episode for my first one, and the A story, one producer liked it, and then the other two tore it apart. And I had to start an entire different episode. Like, it was not anything what it started to be. And you had to be okay with that. And then they liked it. But if I would have cowered and I'm like, oh my God, they didn't like it, I don't know. It's like, all right, I took that. I had to take that L. All right. Yeah, I see that hole. Let me go fix it and do better. And then I felt the real confidence that I did something good, and then it was, And so I think that's something that you have to practice and tap in. It's almost like a spirituality. You got, like, which to me is a part of art. you got to tap into that and figure that out on your own. That's
We all feel that. I have more questions. Does anyone have more questions? I want to use up all the time that we have with you, so we have about 15 more minutes until 6 o'clock. So going back to, because I love talking about process and learning about other writers' process, and you spoke about. Can you speak more to that? You mentioned having a voice recorder, needing the space to write. Can you, and of course it's connected to spiritual, when do you know when you're flowing with your writing? So, Ashley, can you give us a bigger picture about your process and how that looks like?
I feel like it changes sometimes, but on this show, my process is research. It's a really research-based show, heavy show. I enjoy research, so that kind of works out. But it starts there, and I trust that at one point this will come together, and that's not easy to do. That's always a challenge. But somewhere, like, I know what something's supposed to be about. I have to get from A to B, and I got to fill all of that in between. That's how, to me, TV writing is. And in my research somewhere, I'll get an idea and I'll be like, oh, that's cool. I use the whiteboard to beat out how I'm going to do it. This is this beat, that is that beat, and then you simplify it. You can't have too many. I'm like, oh, I just made this really complicated. I got about 50 minutes to do this. So, let me peel it back. That's how my process can be writing on this show. That I start with the research, I figure out what that is, and then I trust that I know the show, and I'm constantly watching old episodes. I'm constantly reading old scripts to keep me engaged in this story and to stay with these characters. And then I go from there. When I'm writing on my own, almost always it comes from listening to music. Music does not play a big factor when I'm writing on this show, but when I'm writing my own original work, it's always like something I listen to. I create all types of playlists for all types of stories, and I can get a whole idea based off of it. A lot of things happen when I'm around water. It's very cleansy. I can be washing my hands, washing my face. A lot of times I'm in the shower, and in the shower, I'm like running a scene through my head. And sometimes I have to like rush out because I'm like, I'm going to forget if I do not write this down. And I keep the notes on the iPhone app, a running list of ideas. I'll write full scene on there. And I use voice recording app all the time, because sometimes I just have to act it out, and so that's a lot of the process for me. And then I sleep on it. I write something, you're flowing when you're at the computer and your hands on the keyboard. Yeah. Like that's how it's hard to get there. It's hard to get to that point sometimes. But yeah, and making a schedule of like, these days no matter what, I'm gonna sit at this computer and I'm gonna start this. Now working on the show, you better find that, because you got about like a week to write this script, a week to write this outline. It's not a lot of time, and I have to put myself on it is my job, so I put myself on this schedule. I'm gonna do one act a day, and like I said, deadlines work for me. And sometimes giving yourself a deadline is really, really good. My deadlines are based on my employment, so it made it very, so it's like, you don't want to get fired, so you better hit that deadline. But I think giving yourself personal deadlines are great. But I always start with music. I don't know what it is, but that's what it is for me. And and then notes, and then I have a ton of notebooks all over my house, half full. And I love writing things down before I type them out. And then some scripts have always been just on the computer. They've never been, on paper. But yeah, so it's not like one path for me. I don't know if I answered this question at all.
Yes, yes. I feel so inspired because it sounds like, it's you use what is ever in your toolbox, right? To speak, to call on the muses, to call on the angels, to help create the stories. So
Yeah.
in addition to making playlists, what other resources can you recommend? What other approaches can we take on?
Read scripts. Like, I never took a screenwriting class, and that's not like something to brag about because I think I see the point of writing classes, but I never did. So how I learned how to write a script was through reading scripts. I took I would have been like 18, and at the time, I don't know if this website is still around. It was called Scriptorama, and they just had, I see someone nodding. So they had like all the scripts for all the movies that I loved. And I just started reading them and it was like, oh, okay. And I would compare them. I would study it like I was in school. Like, okay, I'm reading Pulp Fiction. Now let me go watch Pulp Fiction. And then let me go back to read Pulp Fiction. And so it was a great way to see other people's processes and to know that there's no right way to write something. Like how Tarantino writes his scripts is not how Christopher Nolan wrote his. And some people are very descriptive, and then other people are very vague. He opened the door, Some people are like, he opened the door slowly and creeped in, and his head peeked through the hallway, like just different styles. And then it helps me figure out my style, and then my style changes. But yeah, reading scripts is great. I remember it was the head of the film department at Columbia, and he said that parents always come up to him like, what can my kids do now? And he's like, read. And like, I will always remember that. I just always remember him saying that. And that's just so true. It's just like reading. If I love a movie, if I love a show, I am going to read that script. Like even if I've already seen the movie, I'm like, I remember seeing Black Swan, like, oh my God, I gotta read this script. What was this like on the page? How much of what on the page made it to the screen? And same with great TV shows. I want to read the pilot. That's the best way to understand how to write a pilot. Like it's to understand how great pilots are made. Or how they're written. Yeah.
Yes.
And that is free. That's things you can find on the internet.
Yes. I can pull up a bunch of links for that. Imani?
Yeah, I had another question around building that network, especially now that and continuing to build that. So what do your plans look like for fostering community now in LA, especially as it's opening back up? And what does kind of the writer's room, like networking scene kind of look like?
Well, I'm not sure what the scene is. Because it's just been the whole time for me. But so many writers seem to just know each other, mainly because so many people work on so many shows. Just like if I'm in Chicago, it feels like I know all the film people there. It's like because I just worked on all these shows even before I was on Fire, and you come across people. I like things to happen like this organic way. I'm not a big picture. I don't have like a 5-year plan like some people. That's like something I used to always hear. Because I know how quickly they change. And I have to be open to changing. And I have to be open to things not going my way. And so it's more like if I feel like an opportunity comes up with someone who I feel like can be a part of my community, then I'm just going to go for it. I'm an extrovert. I love people, even when I hate people. And like, yeah, so I don't do the planning thing because I can suffer from anxiety. anxiety is from thinking about things that haven't happened yet. And in order to protect my mental and emotional stability, I don't go too far in the future, because you could not have told me this was going to happen the way it happened. You really couldn't. You could not have told me it was. And all I can do is believe that it was going to happen for me, which is what I think everybody should. That it will, and it's not going to happen how it happened for this person over here. You know what I mean? Like no one thought I was going to get here from locations. I thought I could, but I'm sure no one else actually thought that. And so, yeah, I think it's just about going with the flow, letting things happen organically, obviously being a go-getter and seizing opportunities, because I wasn't always good at that, especially when I was in my 20s. And being a genuine person. And I think if you're a genuine person, you're going to attract that somewhere, and like the producer who helped me, who never wants credit for anything. And he's like, oh, you did this on your own. And I'm like, dude, no, I could not have done this without you, like for real. And he's always like, I had someone who helped me when I really needed someone. Then you did that for me. And he's like, and one day you'll have the power to do it for someone else. So it's like building like organic networking and relationships, not being a user. I think that's just good karma, if you believe in karma.
I can say I do.
Okay.
Ashley, this was so wonderful. Well, we have 5 minutes left, so we're just going to wrap it up early unless anyone has some last remaining questions. Yeah. Okay. I'm also going to check on here. Oh, there are questions here. All right. Well, we have 5 minutes left. Might as well. I don't know if this is something that you can answer. It's very specific about funding. This person is asking, Olivia Nicholas is asking, what is your advice to a filmmaker, so producer, writer, director, developing a Chicago-based story on a Chicago landmark from the 1930s to 40s, whose time has arrived to present the project to attract? That is a long question. You can pass on this question if it's not directly related.
I don't know a lot about funding. Like, I wish I did. Okay, I see it.
So Nicholas, we're gonna try, but Ashley does not have a background in funding films. But
Yeah, I don't. I wish I did. I wish I could tell you exactly how to do that. I've never known.
how about we save your question, Nicholas, for a future event with producers, because they can definitely.
Yeah, that sounds like a great question for producers.
We have another great question from this person. Seems so familiar. Kwame Amoku, how do you feel about being the only POC sometimes? So person of color sometimes in a writer's room, possibly on a set, on a crew. How do you feel about that?
Sometimes I think when you are the only of anything, you can be the only woman, you feel the need to have a voice for that background. It's interesting seeing how people perceive that, because then you're like, I don't want to be just the Black voice, just the voice for women. But I have to always be authentically myself. So I'm going to always put a little bit of myself in there somehow. And yeah, it's not a great feeling, to tell you the truth. Like, just to get real, it's not the best feeling. It's not the best feeling. I hope that all of that changes, because I believe that representation is really important, and you need that representation behind the scenes too. That's how we get a different perspective on the world, from outside of the world you grew up in, and no matter if you're a person of color or not. And it's very hard to hate someone from afar. It's very I mean, it's very easy to hate someone from afar. It's very hard to hate them up close because now you're like learning about them and things like that. So hopefully all that changes. But yeah, it's not the best. It's not the best feeling. It can be very lonely and very isolating.
Do you see that changing? Do you feel like you can play a role in changing that? And
I do. I mean, because I'm looking at a room full of people of color right now. You know.
Yes, there. I also, we also believe that we can make the change and we can bring it. Granted, Hollywood has been entrenched in a long history and a long what feels like a permanent structure, but it's not. These things. Culture can change, and certainly a culture where few voices or people of color, minorities have a little voice that can change to have a bigger voice, right? All right, so we're gonna wrap it up. Ashley, you are amazing.
Yes.
The future is big clap to Ashley. Thank you for all of your insights, just sharing your time with us, your experience with us. It means so much to us. And, the future is bright. The future is bright for you. And we are going to follow you. Know that. We are going to follow your career. We're going to root for you from Chicago. And please do not be a stranger. Please, when we want to see you when you're back in Chicago, certainly plan something around you being here because we want to celebrate you. And we're proud of you because you're a Chicago home girl, so to speak. So thank you for everything. This pretty much wraps it up. And
thanks for inviting me. This was fun.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thanks, Ashley. Bye.
Bye.